Lincoln and Connor started sweating bullets. The Pringy child was swearing to himself for not simply calling his sister much earlier, and Lincoln couldn't help but remember the time when Lynn threatened to beat him with the bat all those weeks ago. While he still managed to avoid getting beaten up, although Lynn said it was a bluff, it seemed like a fate destined to have his place married to the wooden stick. The only silver lining that he could see was the bats weren't made of metal. "So any last words before you visit the doctor?" Craig asked. "Hey, lose this?" a feminine voice called out. The teens looked at the source only to find their bicycles flying right towards them. Bob looked at the full brunt of the projectile to his chest, knocking him flat on his back. The bike tumbled for a bit, causing everyone to scatter away before the object came to a rest on the side. Looking at who threw the bike, there was a mixture of immense relief and same confusion between two parties. Lynn stood there with a scowl on her face, her hands gripping one another at the bikes. Ronnie Ann stood next to her, giving her own glare at the older boys. "Who the hell are you?" Murray asked. "Someone who's about to kick your ass," Lynn shouted. She gripped one of the front wheels of the bike, and to everyone's surprise, she swiftly tore off the entire wheel off and threw it like a buzzsaw at the group. The teens scrambled away with Lincoln and Connor ducking to avoid the flying object. Murray wasn't nearly quick enough, so he screamed as he put the bat up in defense. The impact of the wheel forced him onto his back before the wheel went and crashed against a nearby tree. Seeing that they were no longer cornered, Lincoln and Connor got to their feet and ran up to the two girls. Lynn momentarily took their eyes off the group, giving a soft look at her brother. "You alright, Lincoln?" "Yeah," Lincoln replied, panting a little. "Just a bit shaken." Ronnie Ann raised an eyebrow at Connor. "Who are you?" "Name's Connor Ann." "Hey!" Lynn squinted at the blonde. Haven't I seen you somewhere?" Connor's pupils shrank as he fidgeted so slightly. No." "Can we talk about this later?" Lincoln thankfully cut in. Paul looked down at Bob, who was still clutching his chest. "You alright?" "I think something's broken." Came Bob's weak response. Craig started to stare at the agape discarded bike wheel for a few seconds. "I'm gonna kill that girl for wrecking my bike!" he yelled, catching the attention of the kids. Lyndon looked back at the teens as their lips curled down to a deep frown. "Guys, I want you to get out of here as fast as you can. I'll deal with those two punks." Her voice was nearly quiet, so much that Lincoln thought he misheard her. "Wait, what, Lynn? You can't exactly be thinking about taking on those guys." Lincoln tried to reason. "I'm with Link on that. I can help you," Ronnie Ann added, folding her arms. "Plus, I never forgot to throw anything yet." Lyndon turned her head towards the little tomboy. "No, Ronnie Ann, you make sure Lincoln's safe. Plus, no offense, I doubt you fare well against these boys, especially ones with bats." "Look who's talking," Ronaldo retorted. "Well, let me ask you this." Lyndon put a hand to her hip. "Do you take, or have you taken, any sort of martial arts class?" "No," the dark-haired girl quickly responded. "Have you ever used a handheld weapon before?" "No." "Have you ever dealt with somebody holding a weapon before?" Ronaldo went silent for a moment. "Does a book count?" Lyndon shook her head. "No, it doesn't. Also, have you seen these breech furnitures just for the heck of it, whenever you are bored?" Connor gave a surprised look at while Ronaldo looked at it like if Lynn was crazy. Why would he even do that?" "My point is, exactly, hate telling you this, sister, but you wouldn't last 2 minutes against them. If they've been chasing Lincoln, what's his face, with those bats out there, they're pretty serious." The 13-year-old looked back at the teens, who were approaching the entrance. "Now go." They hesitated for a moment, but began to take off down the street a moment later. Lincoln remained behind, though. He didn't like it what Lynn had planned, but he knew that he couldn't sway her away as if her mind was on set. Sighing heavily. "Okay, but be safe, please." "Hey," Lyndon glanced at him. "If it makes you feel any better, just call the cops when you get a chance." Lincoln nodded, quickly pulling his sister into a hug. When she returned it with the earnest before, smiling it down to his street. She then turned back towards her enemies, who were now growing cocky, even given their numerical average. "Oh, this is rich. You really think you could take all on us short stuff?" Craig chuckled. Lynn gave a curt laugh of her own, dumping her own backpack to the side. Oh, I'll do more than that. Just imagine your bike is your face. Eyeing at the bats, she started formulating a little battle plan in her head. Upon seeing the logo on the wooden sticks, she couldn't help but groan intentionally at these guys were from the Hazeltucky. That might have explained why they looked somewhat brutish, even if they were amateurs. Their size and their weapons would make up for that. Lynn figured she could do some more decent damage with her fists and kicks, especially towards the vital areas, but if she were going to really take them all down, she would have to borrow one of her rare weapons. Should be simple enough to do, seeing that she was already down for the count. Looking down, Lynn knelt down as she grasped at the back of the ruined wheeled bike. It was more secure than the front, so it held only a few seconds before she removed it. The Jacques then heard Greg groan upon this, which gave her a wide grin. Wrapping her fingers as the few spokes, she even held the wheel like a shield. Now, come on, come at me, bro. The younger teens didn't have to be told twice. They all attempted to jump at her at once. Lynn snorted a little. Though her martial arts training, she also had learned to let her opponent make the mistake first, punish them for it. The boy, seeing a few writes now, normally all 5 of them could attack her all at once if she was pinned. However, but she had a free movement and temporarily shielded before jumping to avoid the swing that was aimed of one of her exposed legs. The brunette moved down quickly to shield the back of her head to block few brow aimed there, promptly shoved into the right wheel into Chris's face, then delivering a kick to Murray's gut. Murray faltered a little, during which Lynn bashed him, in fact, with the shield to knock him down. Paul swung so hard from the side, to which Lynn blocked again, the momentum pushed her right back into the right, making and leaving an opening for Chris to swing at her leg. Lynn even kicked at the intercept of the bat, groaned a bit as the impact of her shoe caused her to vibrate in pain a little bit. She didn't want to dwell any further as Chris sent a fist towards her. Gritting her teeth, Lynn grabbed his hand and do a judo throw him over her head. The teen cried out as he landed on his back. Lynn made an attempt to steal his bat, but was cut off when Pat rushed her with a tackle equivalent to a football player. The shorter girl dug her cleats down to the ground to stop the charge, but did this little as Pat slammed her into the base of the tree. Lynn gave a sharp yell upon the impact, her guard lowering just enough for Pat to deliver the free punches to her face. The first and second struck her forehead and cheek respectively. The third strike occurred just under Lynn's right eye, but before the fourth could land home, Lynn angrily grabbed his fist and twisted it in a very awkward angle. Pat cried out before Lynn delivered a savage punch to his nose. She was satisfied upon hearing the subtle pops and cracks accompanied with the broken nasal passage. Pat immensely stumbled back, dropping a bit in the bat in the process. Seizing the chance, Lynn then took it as her own before jumping high enough so that she was level with the teen's head. The last thing Pat saw before his wordle faded was the thickest part of the wooden object swing towards him. Pat then dropped like a stone. His eyes then rolled back into his head with the conscience that escaped him. As Lynn smiled at her handiwork, she heard the distant sound of a ball hitting a bat. Swiftly turning her head, she lifted the bike wheel just to block a few baseballs flying towards her. Well, Pat's down, Chris bemoaned. He was an idiot anyway, Paul summarized, tossing another ball into his hand. Geez, how many more things do you guys have? Lynn asked out of curiosity. You'd have to act like those machines at the batting cages, although we technically stole some from there anyway. Greg then replied, tossing a ball up and down. All 4 boys immediately batted several balls at Lynn's direction, forcing her to take cover behind her shield. Some 20 feet behind her to her left, Bob leaned up with a groan, and his chest aching almost every time he moved. He spotted a few friends pinning Lynn underneath the constant fire, although he was slowly walking away from her towards them. He also spotted Pat unconscious with blood coming out of his nose. The 13-year-old was growing now more concerned about how often Spokes behind the wheel, and if she didn't do something soon, she'd lose her only means as protection. She sped up the pace a little bit just to make sure that it kept her feet protected if the boys decided to target her there. The brunette was completely unaware that Bob was beginning to stand up. Seeing that he had an opening, Bob then spotted one of the wayward baseballs that had been deflected by Lynn near his feet. Then he stood up, using his pitching skills, aimed the ball for the back of the right side of her head. Winding the arm back, Bob let it loose at 90 miles per hour. Lynn thought she was doing fairly well against the pukes. She managed to drop one of them. Another was on the floor, or so she believed. And now she had a bat even to score. Even the second pain detonated the back of her skull. She was fumbling earthward. Her mind was telling her one more thing. She messed up. She got too cocky and then locked into her tunnel vision of 4 boys that were throwing stuff at her. Lynn knew the last guy she beat down wouldn't get back up, but the one who checked the bike earlier would. The 13-year-old was hit the ground with a heap, clutching the spot where the ball hit her. She could already feel a knot forming. Touching just got more pain, but Lynn knew it would pale in comparison what those 5 boys would do to her now that she was wide open. Just a few blocks away from the park, another set of bushes of British teens were hiding in the direction while munching on some milk chocolates. The treats had been given to them by some poor kid who just used his allowance at the candy store. They laughed at how they remembered how the boy was running around blind due to his having his underpants pulled on top of his head. "So, bro, who's on our list today?" Hank asked. "Well, let's see." Hawk then whipped out this list from his back pocket. "There's that kid by the creek who still owes us 30. There's this little nerdy kid who needs to do our homework. Then there's wrestling practice at 5, and..." The spiky-haired teen stopped upon bumping into the back of his brother. "What you stopping for?" "Check it out." Hank pointed up a few blocks up. Hawk followed his finger and he saw 3 kids coming out of the park and heading for their direction. It was as clear as they were running or jogging, but the 2 fat kids could make out the patches of white on one of the kids' heads. "Hey, it's that nerd we tried to beat up in Dairyland." Hank groaned. His shoulders sank. He ended up spilling some chocolate on this bag that he was holding. "Aw, man, do you think his parents are around? You still owe him that thrashing." Hawk then squinted. He had no better eyesight than his brother, and not because Hank always has those stupid bangs over him. "Nah, just a couple of brats with him." "Well, more meat for us then. Maybe we can get some extra cash off them." "Yeah." As both teens chuckled to themselves as they took up hide and spocks, Hawk then stood in the bushes while boarded the park and while Hank squatted in front of the park near the curb. As the kids ran, Lincoln couldn't help but look back at the park, towards the entrance. He couldn't see Lynn, but he was certain that she started the fight by now, and while there wasn't much he could really do in that sort of situation, aside from potentially being in the crossfire, the lad still felt guilty for his sister while defending herself. However, Lincoln knew what she was doing to protect him, and was going back to aid her would make all of Lynn's efforts still for naught. Still, he could probably take up suggestion of calling the police. That last thought struck Lincoln with the same immense of realization. He mentally chided himself, realizing it sooner. Ronnie Ann probably had her phone on her, but first they needed to put some distance between them and the park. "Ronnie Ann, do you have your phone?" Lincoln asked as he caught up with the 2. "Yeah, it's in my bag." "Great, can you call 911? Right as they were passing by the bushes, large, meaty hands swung towards Lincoln. Before any of the kids could react, it smashed him right in the center of his face. Lincoln's vision whited out as he felt his nose break. A slick cracking noise accompanied it. The sudden halt was stop his momentum as Lincoln's feet slid underneath him, making him land hard onto the back of the dais. The 11-year-old started gasping for his mouth as something pulling under his nose. He'd hear Ronnie Ann shouting something, but he couldn't make out. Squeezing his eyes shut, the world finally started to come back to focus upon opening them. Lincoln put a hand to his nose in a drawing shaky breath, upon realizing how much it was soaked in his own blood. To his right, Lincoln spotted Connor on his stomach, having to ran into that struck the lad to his left. Ronnie Ann was in defensive stance as the 2 large teens made Lincoln's blood run cold, and it was then that Lincoln finally noticed the shadow overlooming him, making him back away in fear. "Sup, nerd?" Hawk grinned, his right hand flexing as he was covered in specks of blood. Lynn could feel the pain on various parts of her body as the teens beat her to the ground with bats, sometimes throwing a kick for good measure. The tire that she was using shielded herself was bent to the point it was hardly making much of a difference. Aside from the potentially saving her from something automatically be broken upon impact of the bat, it didn't help that some she bent spokes in constantly poking her, if which it felt good digging into her own waist. According to that pain that Lynn felt heal that had started to act up again. Taking a few hits towards the same leg on the shin bone made the feeling even worse. The 13-year-old fought back a few tears as one managed to slam one into her bad leg again. She let out a small cry as intense throbbing from that limb became unbearable. Naturally, the other teens were taunting her by now, saying that she talked a big game and she couldn't live up to it. Lynn then tried to tune it out to focus on her pinned state, but the thoughts of Lincoln being right made her feel stupid for not calling her or the other sisters for help on that matter. After a few more bats in the area, was it where her head was? Lynn could feel trickles of blood running down to the left side of her face. After finally what it looked seems like the eternity, all the boys relented. They all gave a ragged breath. Due to exerting so much of the force of punish aloud. Surveying the damage, Lynn had a few bruises forming on her face on top of the small amount of blood that was slipping out from cuts on her head. Her legs had a few bruises that they were also starting to develop as well. The jersey and shorts that she typically wore were dirty and slightly torn, a few pieces from the wheel prodding her, and her right left very stiff. There was a massive headache that she had due to the getting beamed in the back of their head with the baseball. "I thought you'd put up with more of that fight, you little bitch," Murray yelled, stomping his foot on Lynn's shielded one more time. The brunette squealed a little on the impact. She took a little pad out, and that dirt was a toss bag, Bob pointed out, taking a moment to rub his bruised chest. "Man, should have had the energy before we should have used stop on those brats," Craig huffed. "Don't worry, we'll find them and give them their just desserts." Paul then looked down at Lynn, who had managed to lock eyes with him. "Might even do worse to that boy she says it's her bro. Want to give him a 10? Chris asked. "Yeah, I only got enough in my reserves for one." Lynn's eyes widened a bit as she didn't know what kind of numbers she was referring to, but now he couldn't mean anything good. The group then turned to leave, letting the bruised loud lie there. Lynn moved the useless wheel off of her. Her body was telling her just to lay there and recover, yet her mind told her something else. The brunette gritted her teeth as she turned onto her stomach, slowly pushing the body up towards her slow, sore arms. "Come on, Lynn, you've been worse," she tried to herself. "If you don't do something now, Lincoln will suffer horribly, and it'll be on you. Do you really want to fail him again, like last time?" No, come on, get up." Lynn drew a huff in the breath as she pushed her body into a sitting position. "I said get up!" Her brain shouted at the rest of her body. Grabbing her bat, Lynn then stuck it into the ground to use it as support. The Jacques managed to stand up fully on wobbly legs, her right leg in particular screaming to stop being used for support all that weight. "You're not going to hurt him," Lynn spoke slowly, staring at the ground. The boys then turned around in confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" Paul asked. "I said," Lynn directed her attention towards them, her messy hair lifting up, and sure enough to point the boys could see the burning light as they in their eyes. Waves of pure rage followed through her set veins, and as the newfound adrenaline overtook her. "You aren't going to hurt him," she repeated before taking off like a freight train towards them. The boys readied themselves for another fight, but this battle between Lynn was intended to win. Driving them off was their goal in the first time around, but now she was going for a more permanent solution. The Jacques slammed her head along to Murray, who was in front of the group. He thought he could handle it, but Lynn hit him with enough force to knock him back down to several feet. The rest of the boys had scattered around and hit them like bowling pins. Gripping her bat tightly, she slammed right into Murray's midsection, doubling over the pain, his left face left open for Lynn to punch him square in the face. Her knuckles were grazed upon hitting the teeth. Not that Lynn cared, but then she tugged his collar just to save his own face from the dirt. Followed by the bat to the back of his head to drive it in further, the boys then stood in shock at how quick it looked, and Lynn to bring Murray down. She pounced at the opportunity. Leaping into the air, the bat raised, as she intended to slam Chris in the face. However, the teen was quick to dodge before attempting to strike her head. However, Lynn grabbed his bat-minded swing and snatched it from him, rolling to deliver another kick to the stomach. Chris then stumbled back a bit from the hit, before suddenly feeling his airways cut off as something pressed against his neck. Lynn sat there on his shoulders, using her bats to strangle him. Chris staggered, but like a survivor about ridden like a jockey of the green flu. Lynn wasn't about to let go at any moment. The other three boys moved in to dislodge her, but Lynn easily guided Chris into taking most of the hits, only blocking those that she couldn't force to the teen to take. After a few seconds, Chris felt like a bag of sand, completely unconscious. The three teens tried attacking her once again, but at the same time, this proved to be a huge mistake. Lynn gripped the bats in each hand before spinning around, creating a small wall of bats of blunt force to encounter them. Among the hits, she nailed Craig in the knees, making him topple over. Bob then took a few hits to his shoulder and arms, forcing him to back off. Paul then literally was thrown back after getting smacked in the face, stomach, and head. Stopping her spin, Lynn then threw one of the bats at Bob, nailing right into Johnson. He squealed in pain as he brought his hands to his groin, and Lynn followed up with a wide kick across his face. Scratching up with her cleats, one blow to the side of the head was all it was to put him down. Lynn directed her attention to Greg, who was nursing his knee like with subtle hisses. She simply threw her other bat at the force, it being big enough to put him out. The loud huffled into exhaustion, but she knew that she wasn't done yet. Looking over her shoulder, she saw Paul trying to crawl his way to safety. Being a bit disoriented to stand up, nostrils flare, the Jacques then turned on her heels and ran at full speed at him. When she was close, Lynn leaped into the air. Paul darted to look back, only to find himself screaming when Lynn came flying at him. With all the parts of the feet extended, the last thing he registered was Lynn screaming as both of them painted towards himself on his face as they forced his sorry carcass into the dirt, leaving the sizable imprint. Lynn then stood up fully, stretching her back out, grunting a bit as it gave a few pops. Surveying the damage she dealt, the Jacques knew that she had won. All the boys had some bruises on from another, with blood coming out of their mouths for a few of them. She could see a few of them twitching every now and then, indicating they were still breathing. Lynn would have done it more, but she felt like she got her message across. If anyone dares to come after Lincoln, they'd have to get through her first. A scream suddenly sounded through the air, sending a chill up Lynn's spine. She knew all too well it sounded fairly close. Lynn then grimaced a bit at her pain and her legs made itself known again, but she did her best to ignore it. Grabbing the one discarded box, she ran with a limp towards the park entrance, stealing her intent to brutalize whoever it was messing with her brother. Hank laughed at the little girl who thought she could stand a chance against him. "You got lost, sissy?" "No, but you and your fat friend over there, who are about to wish that you hadn't done that," Ronnie Ann growled, clenching her fists together. She was already pissed that Hawk had blindsided Lincoln to the point where he broke his nose, and she was currently flailing Lynn's promise to watch over him. Putting two and two together was making all of her blood boil even more. "Oh, really?" Hank chuckled, picking up Ronnie Ann by the backpack. "You know what shrimps like you," he prodded with the stomach, "only end up getting walked over by people like me, right? What makes you think you could do anything?" Ronnie Ann growled before taking Hank's finger and biting on it like a dog. The fat teen screamed as he started to shake it off. Hawk then glanced away from Lincoln and pointed over. He laughed at himself before walking over to help his brother out. Lincoln was still in shock from the hit, but Connor managed to right himself again. The blonde then took out his phone, seeing it had 4% charge now. Seeing that they weren't going to get safety at this point, Connor quickly opened up the text and message app, sent a clean message cut text to Carol. "Need help urgently at the corner of the park. It's serious trouble with bullies." While Connor knew Carol wasn't much of a fighter, he hoped that she could at least do something. Hawk shrugged it off over to Hank, who was shaking his hand prior to attempt to dislodge Ronnie Ann. She's a real feisty one, isn't she? Just get her off. Get her off! Hawk then rolled over his eyes before grabbing Ronnie Ann by the backpack and ripping her off. Hank then screamed again as her teeth tore skin. The spiky-haired teen then grimaciously threw her towards some nearby trash cans. A metallic crash was heard and the two of them split, dusting their hands off. There, happy? Hank rubbed his sore finger. She's a crazy one, bro. Now, where were we? Hawk then grinned back at Lincoln, the white-haired boy who had been staring agape where Ronnie Ann was thrown. Starting back up again, he tried to force his body to act quicker, but it didn't seem to respond. Hawk then hoisted him by the collar. Ready for some more knuckle sandwiches? Lincoln looked at the brute's hand, noticing blood spots. Memories of last Halloween soon came to the front of his mind, and his fear was temporarily replaced with confusion. Wait, I thought you guys were afraid of blood. Hank laughed. Yeah, we were. But in case we ended up running away like little girls, we got a bunch of gory games, so we're used to seeing it. Yeah, those games are awesome. We weren't so afraid of blood anymore. Hawk then grinned evilly at Lincoln, who just stared at him in shock, but were more inclined to use it. Lincoln then gulped, a trickle of sweat going on his right side. Looks like a broken nose would be the least of his worries. His eyes then caught on Hawk, looking at his chipped tooth, to which Lincoln quickly shook his hand to cover his mouth. I think I'm running low on tooth fairy money, and yours too. Hawk then raised his fist. Lincoln closed his eyes as he prepared for the searing pain that would soon infect on his face. Suddenly a feminine scream shot out of the air before the red-headed faced Ronolda lashed herself onto Hawk's face. She clawed at his eyes like an angry mouse cat, and the large boy screaming in pain. Hawk was forced to let go of Lincoln as she tried to get Ronolda off of him, and like last time, Hank was the one laughing. When he looked at Lincoln and Connor, his toothy grin making him nervous. Connor was first to try and run, but a third punch to his cheek sent him spiraling to the ground. When he grabbed Lincoln and reached for his undies, taking a pleasure in the little boy, he screaming as he put the road up his behind. And using his undies as leverage, Yank hung Lincoln at the metal fencing boarding of the park, before he could do the same to Connor. Wait there a second, she ordered them. Connor then moved his mouth a bit, as he felt something loose. Before spitting out a tooth, a small trail of blood started dripping down from his lips. Scratches were visible from the side of his face as he made contact with the ground. Hawk flailed around as Ronolda was now spitting parts of his face and pulling at his ears. Hank then whistled as he strolled up to a fighting pair. My turn, he shouted, before ripping the little Latina off of his brother's face. She then held a firm grip as Ronnie Ann struggled at his hands, kicking away wildly. Hawk then rubbed his face for a bit, before growling at the little girl. His face was covered in scratches and bite marks, with a bruise forming around his eyes. Ronnie Ann continued to struggle in Hank's grasp, before Hank sent a first fist right into her midsection, and stopping from the tantrum cold. As the air was knocked out of her, Lincoln then let out a gasp as Hawk then punched her thrice in the face, twice in the mouth and one for the eye. Her body shuddered from each blow, but surprisingly Ronolda was still defiant despite her lips swelling up and her eye darkening. Glaring at the teen. Is that the best you got? Oh, you want some more, huh? Hawk then sneered, cracking his knuckles. Ronnie Ann then responded by spitting some blood into his face. Hawk then grimaced a bit in disgust while Hank let out a belly laugh. Hawk took two and two together to wipe his face, furrowing his brows, and promptly snatched her from Hank by the ponytail. So you like spitting blood, do ya? He then walked over across the street, and some cans had some flies swarming around. The stench was enough to make anybody, the tomboy, even covering her nose. Hope you like eating trash. Ronnie Ann then had her eyes widened before Hank Hawk shoved her face first into the can. Shutting the lid and added for measure, make sure she didn't come back, Hawk picked up a said can and took it over vigorously before kicking it down the street. The can rolled roughly an entire block and even nearly getting hit by the car. before it abruptly stopped by the lag post. A loud moan was heard before Ronnie Ann groggily popped the lid off. The world was spinning around her eyes, and even a few more bruises appeared on her face due to the little trip she took. Her eye was also a little darker and the first imprint as much more visible. The Latina groggily stood up, using her post for balance. Ronnie Ann felt her stomach give her some rather unsettling noises, giving a few kicks and flips in the process. Her face turned to a light shade of green as she gave a few dry heaves, due to her throat suddenly feeling shorter. It wasn't long before Ronnie Ann clamped her hand over her mouth before emptying her stomach onto the ground. At the Royal Woods High, the student body had just been released to go about doing her daily activities. Amongst them were her best friends Lori and Carol. They were discussing what they could do at the mall. Lori was much better mood nowadays, especially with it seemed more evident that Lincoln was now quite close to returning home. At least the vibe that she picked up. The group text Lynn told her about their other sisters. It was going well too, as Lincoln had now had a bed and dresser ready for his room. It almost looked like he never left, but neatness of the room, along with the storage bins, still served as a reminder of what happened with the original furniture during the bad luck incident. "Do you think I should buy a cake for him?" Lori absent-mindedly questioned. Carol asked, putting her bag into her purse in the backseat of the car. "I was thinking we could get a cake for Lincoln returning home. I mean, I'm betting Dad's going to make one himself, but I doubt he have time. Not sure if Lynn told him in another text." "If you want to, I don't see any harm doing it. Plus, it's just a lot quicker just to buy it from the store than making one. I mean, like, I love my grandmother's cakes, but those just take hours. But on the plus side, she makes some really good chocolate cake." Lori felt a bit of drool form in her mouth at the mention of chocolate. Silver lining? It just gave her an idea of what flavor to get. After all, in her opinion, all the girls just needed was to pay Lincoln back for eating up his school project that one time. Carol then heard a buzzing sound in her purse. She calmly ducked into her car just to take it out. Lori noticed too, but gave a shrug. Figured it might be a message from one of her gal pals or her boyfriend. But the hints of the smile on her face? The loud raised an eyebrow upon noticing the frown on her face. "Sorry, Lori, but I gotta go, like right now." "What's wrong?" "My brother is having a bullying problem and I need to sort it out." "But the way he put on caps urgent, he means serious," Carol explained as she started to get in the driver's seat. "Wait a sec." Lori ran over the passenger seat and opened the door. "Let me come with you. I'm used to the same thing with my younger sisters and brother, at least until Lynn somehow took over that job. The more the merrier. Now hang on to something, 'cause I'm about to drive like my grandpa." Lori didn't get the meaning of that, but immediately wished as she strapped over the forward momentum of the car, shoved back into her seat. Carol then sped down the parking lot, tires screeching at their awake. A few students had to jump out of the way as the car sped onto the road. Carol took off down the street after getting her seatbelt on. Lori passed a glance at Carol. The another blonde had a fierce look of determination on her, and that Lori didn't actually see before. All the akin of the mother for coming up for a project from a child. A sudden chill went up Lori's spine as she imagined what Carol looked like if she was actually pissed. She was actually a nice person who could get firm, but never really truly angry. Too bad the closest, oldest loud sibling never witnessed or realized what she's about to witness. Lincoln still held that shocked expression after being forced to witness perhaps the first time Ronnie Ann actually lost in the fight. It should have been surprising due to the size average Hank and Hawk had with their strength. It was actually courageous to be willing to defend them despite being badly outclassed. She even managed to cause a few injuries, but seeing her getting a hit like that and being tossed into a garbage was something Lincoln doubted he'd ever unsee. When he rolled the can out of sight, Lincoln even grew more worried for her. At the same time, it spiked in aggression. While the 11-year-old didn't truly understand the whole boyfriend-girlfriend thing, at least he knew one part of each partner, that they would protect one another. Ronnie Ann certainly did her part, but what about him? All Lincoln did was get pushed around and hung like a piñata. One of Lincoln's eyes twitched a little as he witnessed kept playing in his head. If he wasn't stuck in that pole right now, he would have certainly made to try to preventing what occurred, possibly even giving Ronnie Ann a chance to break free and do more damage, but if she was too stunned to do anything, that made him feel sick to his stomach. But the one thing was certain though, he was going to try and get as many cheap shots as he could. The Loud didn't even realize how angry he was looking until Hawk called him out. "Aw, this little twerp is mad we tossed his girlfriend away," he then spoke in a babying tone. Lincoln curled his hands tighter, biting his lip to have a face turn of light shade red. "You shouldn't be so tough if I was stuck up here." His words then left before it could stop him. "Ha! You're just much of a wimp before I hung you up," Hank added. "But since you want down," he used his hand on Lincoln's head and pressed down on his feet as he touched the ground. The boy cringed as his undies gave him a massive wedgie. Then, sent flying upwards towards Hank, released him, with his underpants still attached to the metal pedal, and the boy wound up bouncing against it, causing some pain to his back. The boys even laughed at the boy like a makeshift pedaling ball. After getting over soreness, Lincoln parts his lips to slowly grind his teeth together. Visible steam was coming off from his head, which the bullies just scoffed at. "Nice job, bro. You made 'em mad," Hawk chuckled. Hank stifled a laugh before using Connor as an armrest. The Pringy boy winced upon the weight settling him. "Tell you what, let you get one shot at me. If you make a good one, I'll let you go," Hawk told him. Before folding his hands behind his back, leaning his face within Lincoln's arm reach. Lincoln then pondered what he should really do, given that the bullies weren't so inclined to let him go freely. As he raised his fists, he gave a side glance to Connor, who shook his head, telling him not to do it. Lincoln's anger momentarily faded upon debating that decision. But upon looking up at that direction where Ronnie Ann had rolled onto, along with the general treatment he had been receiving from those two brutes, anger was telling Lincoln to go for it, and the consequences be damned. He was going to make his shot count. Sadly, the Loud reeled his arm back for a hook. Hawk quickly leaned back and smashed his fist into Lincoln's chest. The boy let out a scream that mirrored the named mistake, and probably attracting nearby persons. Of any sort of adrenaline the boy was building quickly left arm, as with all the anger stored up, Lincoln drew a sharp breath to draw back, his body hanging limp against the fence in pain. Overtook his abdomen and back. "Alright, I'm getting bored, but before we go, remember what happened when you tried stealing our candy?" Hawk grabbed Lincoln by his shirt, pulling him away from the metal fence, until enough tension caused his undies to rip. Hank seemed to get the idea, grinning at Connor as he pulled him off the fence. No, please, I don't want to be turned into a human pretzel!" Lincoln begged as Hawk held his legs together. "What's a human pretzel?" Connor asked, as a far evidence tone. "Oh, you'll find out," Hank replied. Then something banged on the metal face that drew everyone's attention. Turning to the right, the bullies saw two 11-year-olds were surprised to see the bloodied Lynn Loud glaring at the two bullies. Her stance made it clear that she was having a difficult time standing up straight. "Put them down." Her ragged voice made it more clear that she was in no mood for their crap, much less in any condition to fight. "Geez, you lost a fight?" Hawk asked. "No, they lost." Connor and Lincoln's eyes widened at that. "And I'm going to bat those stupid heads of yours at the next few blocks, if you don't put them down!" Lynn then spoke through her gritted teeth. Her rage was erupted like a volcano after a quick survey as to what happened. Lincoln was injured a bit and bleeding, and which ticked her off to no end. Connor was also injured, and Ronnie Ann was nowhere to be found. She spotted her backpack somewhere, toppled over trash cans, and figured it may have something to do with it. The Jacques remembered the two knuckleheads as clear as day, some guys who messed up her ankle during a football, and at the same ones who nearly ruined Halloween for everyone on the street. Well, at least now Lynn could return the favor. "Hey, Hawk, isn't that the same kid whose ankle we busted back in football?" Hank asked, scratching his hair. "Heck yeah, it is. And look at that leg. We left a mark." Hawk chuckled, dropping Lincoln like he was a sack of lead. And Lincoln couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt from that. He thought Lynn's heel would have been fully healed after fully biting it, but it seemed like she was in some pain every now and then. "Well, if you're looking for a fight, you've come to the right place," Hank stated, pushing Connor to the bushes so he was stuck halfway in. The boy then kicked his feet around in effort to find level ground. Do you even think you stand a chance against us with now how you look right now? Hawk asked, cracking his knuckles. Oh, I've been through worse. Lin gave a rare grin before taking off at them as her body allowed. Once the fight started, Lincoln began to try to pull Connor out of the bushes, only pausing every few moments to glance at the combatants fighting.